I get to represent the building architecture team today because a cold has kind of wiped through the building team and knocked a number of us down. I am also fighting some bronchial asthma stuff that, if you've been around me lately, I can tend to really go into a coughing fit. I am not contagious, the doctor assures me. I've taken my inhaler and my medicine, so I'm hoping I'll be okay. Joel will attest, though, this is my worst time of day, right? If I start a coughing fit, I'm just gonna hand the mic to somebody else and then say, talk amongst yourself. All right, so why do we have you here today? What we're hoping to do, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is kind of have your input. We want to share with you a few things, but what are we missing? What haven't we thought about before we move with the architects into the next stages of design? So I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but first, we want to make sure that we are grounding ourselves in our building our future meetings. We remind ourselves and read these often as a chalice lighting of our vision. So the vision for our new space is to welcome people with inclusive spaces and universal access, to nurture spirituality and personal growth with beauty, art, and inspiration, to practice justice with an eco-restorative design, to expand our community with flexible and multi-purpose space, to create joy and resilience with places for play, to care for sacred space that honors our ancestors and nature, and to grow by embodying the intersection of public witness and preserved wilderness. So as we go through talking about the current design and some possible modifications, those are the values that are going to ground us in thinking about what we might be missing or what we might change some things. All right, so part of why we're here is there are different stages of the architectural design. We have the pre-design stage, sometimes called the concept design. We began this really heavy duty last June, and we are 80 to 85% complete here. This is the hardest part. This is where we gathered information, surveys, had us look at things, made changes, work on a second option, a third option, and we keep talking about it so that we feel like we have a really strong concept. The next phase that we would move into is the schematic design phase, where we are kind of finalizing all of those drawings. Then the design development phase, we're starting to think about some engineering and how things are fitting, are in those spaces. And finally, the construction documents, with the hopes that we can move into that in fall 2024. Once we have the construction documents and we have things in place budget-wise, capital campaign, sale of the building, then we are ready to begin construction. So, just a reminder, you know how George at his meetings always goes, this is not the final design. So the design that we are looking at is the design that was shared with everybody in the capital campaign packets in this brochure.
Does anybody need one? We've got them here.
Yep, slightly different than this design on our capital campaign board.
It's also on the website, right?
It's also on the website, but we can have that. So what we want to do is we want to start, as we've been working on it over the last few weeks, there's been a few things that as we look at that design, we've started to think, you know what? Maybe an adjustment here or there would be helpful. So we wanted to share those ideas with you and then let you at your tables talk about these designs and help us make sure we are not missing anything. All right. So we have a couple of things that we're looking at, and I'm gonna let Luke talk about the sanctuary floor a little bit more deeply. That's been a lot of conversation. So we'll come back to that. We have been working with SEMSA, the Southeastern Minnesota Center for Independent Living, and they will help us make sure that the entire building is accessible, down to making sure the width of the doors are appropriate for wheelchairs wherever we go, that the turning ratios when you're going into a bathroom is appropriate, that we have bathrooms that fit for wheelchairs, we have bathrooms that fit for somebody who maybe uses a walker and has the appropriate supports there. So after talking with Semsville, we had some thoughts of things that we might want to consider changing. So that's where we're at now. And we'll look at a couple of those things and then talk about what we're missing. Do you want to talk about sanctuary floor first?
Sure.
Okay,
You want me to?
sure.
Okay. I think I'll talk first and then show.
Okay.
You want me to do that?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Do you want me to hit that
Yeah.
if I can hit the right key?
Yeah. So, like any process in Unitarian Universalism, we are both spiritual and design pluralists. There are many paths that we consider and try to incorporate, and things change as you think of things from different perspectives. So one of the things that we knew starting off was that we wanted this space to be as flexible as possible for a variety of needs, community needs, church needs as well. And when we started placing that value with the design in the sanctuary, which was originally meant to be, the original concept was a sloped floor with a combination of chairs and some pews. It didn't seem particularly flexible or versatile to say, all right, we want a super flexible, versatile design. So let's make the floor at an angle and bolt the chairs to the ground. It didn't really fit. So we started thinking of different possibilities. One of the benefits of a sloped floor is experienced in different settings. Our sight lines, it feels a little more like a theater in that way. You're able to see things a little more easily, but there are ways to adjust for that and plan for that with a more horizontal setting. And that also allows, if we think 10, 50, 100 years into the future, what worship and church will be used for and how it will be structured or provide maximum flexibility. A flat floor might be the way to do that, as well as the conversation at the same time, parallel conversation about accessibility of the space. How are we making sure people can get around in equitable ways as well? So we've moved away from the sloped floor towards a flat floor. And with that came the option in terms of future expansion design to not necessarily be fixed towards a corner chancel as well. So we worked both on design and as well as with musicians within the church, thinking about how would this sanctuary be set up in such a way that would provide a wonderful experience for Sunday morning services, as well as provide adequate space for flexibility for other events. Thinking like if we wanted to move chairs out of the way and have a beautiful large labyrinth, a cloth labyrinth that some congregations have, or a spiritual practice space during Chalice Camp. When it's raining outside, we need to be inside, but we don't want to be down on the floor in the commons with the Cheetos and whatever on the floor, but we need some space for grounding or spiritual practice or some large event that the sanctuary could be used for that as well. So with that, I think you can maybe just, there you go. So let me preface this and say, this is what we're calling the cheap way to start design, with an in-house little sketch of an idea rather than working with the architects, because that takes a lot more finances once you're to that point, and we wanted some input. So the idea behind this is just to give you a basic sense of the sanctuary space. And actually, if you want to go to the next one, Kim, it'll focus in on this a little bit more. Yeah, this is not the final design. Everybody now together. So the idea is the chancel moving to the west wall, and access being through ramps on both sides. So that's an idea of universal design or universal access, that everybody accesses the chancel in the same way. And then you have interlocking or chairs. Maybe they're like the chairs we have, maybe they're interlocking or stackable chairs in some sort of fashion that's has some curve to it for sight lines and flexibility, but not fixed to the floor, so they could shift and change. Chancel in the center. Up here, you see kind of these lines. The idea is that that is a choral music area that has some small platforms. The Unitarian Society in Madison has that set up around the side of the chancel so that there are some levels for musicians to still use for amplification and for having that kind of more enclosed sense for choir singing and stuff like that, as well as a dedicated space kind of out front platform where solo musicians could be performing from, where you could have mic access for the sound system, that sort of stuff, as well as the ability for the choir to be able to easily exit and enter, and be in a spot where they can sing where they're at without having to move logistically, which is also more accessible and inclusive for choristers, so that they don't have to be moving around in front of the chancel. There's just a little more set space for that. Down in the bottom right, we added the possibility, again, like this is all conceptual, right? So some sort of sensory area, whether that's softer seating or some floor rugs or different things for different modalities of being and needing some different physical space, as is common in more and more churches and congregations across denominations as well. And that with a flexible flat floor, that could be moved around, or almost everything in here could be moved around in some way. There's still questions about the placement of where would be the best place acoustically for like the organ, and how much room does there need to be? How high is the chancel, which then dictates how long the ramps need to be, so you have the right amount of rise per length. Things like that are still in flux. But that's a general idea of if we had a flat floor providing flexibility. Most of the fixed things are up against the west wall, so this whole center area could be cleared out for whatever other purposes you had. And if you had newer chairs that were interlocking as well, it provides some flexibility or some stability, even though they're still flexible and can be moved, so that they wouldn't constantly be adjusting out of space, and the minister or worship associates wouldn't be here really early Sunday morning. Chair, this is off, this isn't centered, how did that get like that, constantly. So a little bit of stability. So that's just a little vision of how I spend my Sunday mornings at 7. Anyway, so I don't know if you want to pause there or move to the next.
I'll go to the next one.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
When is the organ in this group?
In this, there's two options. Either this one kind of facing out into the center of the room, or up there is where it was in the last plan. It says organ or storage or organ down here. So those are a couple of the options flanked on either side.
And that's one of those parts that fits in one of those later stages of design. We will have an acoustical engineer be looking at the whole sanctuary to identify where do pieces need to go, what materials do we want to use to have the very best acoustics that we have. And the architects know that that is one of our priorities for the sanctuary space, and they have plans to have an acoustical engineer be looking at things. So in addition to the shifting of this sanctuary space doesn't change at all the ability to have that balcony space as an option for expansion. So the balcony, I believe, can still be, in this area, or the architects will let us know how that would be, but that is still what we're thinking. Is it might make more sense to do a balcony space versus knocking this whole wall down and extending everything out as one of the next steps for expansion. So we're constantly thinking about how do we design this and how we build this for expansion. As we were looking at things, one of our big questions became the nursery was smack dab in the middle of the design that you have in your packets, and the bathrooms were way over here. And the bathrooms over here was a problem for a couple things. First of all, they're not right there. You can't find them unless you know to go this way and then this way. And then it also could create some issues for accessibility and turning ratios and spaces for bathrooms. The nursery then also didn't have any access to light, to natural light, and we thought that would be a really nice option for the nursery. So we are suggesting exploring the idea of flipping the bathrooms in the nursery, which allows the bathrooms to be designed with easier accessibility. They're right there near the sanctuary. If you've got a little kiddo with you that has to go to the bathroom now, then you can just scoot right out here and it's right there. You don't have to go over here, over here, over here, down the hall, over here, and then you find the bathroom. So that is one of the big things that we're looking at as a possible shift. By putting the bathrooms here, we're not 100% sure, but we believe that that would open up this hearth room space. And maybe hearth room isn't the best name for it, because that's what we call this space here, but it would be a comparable space to that. Comfy seating, a space that could be closed off, a space that can serve as, if you are not wanting to go downstairs to the commons, there could be a little coffee area, space for people to sit and relax or have some quiet space there after the sanctuary, or to come out here if they wanted. We have an item there with display. Is Walt's generosity team has really been working on looking at a lot of our historical items. And we've been talking about the idea of maybe this becomes what we call our heritage room or something like that, where we are displaying a lot of our history and a lot of the items that we have brought with us from Grace Church and other churches, even the medallions that have been, that are going to be dug up and restored. We're looking for a good place for that. Luke talked about that during the service, and there might be some information. So you'll notice this hearth room is slightly bigger, and then has this as a conference library room there. Some of the things may not have the exact same name as what it has on your current design, but those are the big ideas that we've been talking about and maybe suggesting for a shift. So here is our question. What are we missing? What have we not thought about? What should we bring forward into those discussions with the architects as we come to the end of the conceptual design phase and start getting ready to go into the schematic design phase, the next phase? Because we'd like to have our ideas pretty solid and in place before we move forward.